We are actually still, for those of you who are visiting, and if you're joining us online for the first time, we want to welcome you to our sermon series on Matthew and the Sermon on the Mount. And so we have come to the section where Jesus talks about oath-taking, where he says, "Let your yes be yes, and your no be no." Well, I know this is kind of late notice, but I saw in an advertisement on the internet for 2 tickets to the big game tomorrow, the Super Bowl, in Inglewood, California at SoFi Stadium. They are box seats. This Jake spent $10,000 a piece to buy, which include a ride from the airport, free food, and a pass to the winner's locker room. What he did not realize when he purchased these tickets is that it would be on the same day as his wedding. So if you are interested, he is looking for someone to take his place. I know it's late notice, but it will be at St. Paul's Church at 3 p.m. Her name is Ashley. She's 5'5", about 110 pounds, is a good cook, and enjoys the outdoors. I don't think that groom's vows were going to mean very much. Vows, oaths, where did they come from? They've been around a long time. They are word acts where we promise someone that we will act a certain way, not just now, but also in the future. The Romans used them during the time of Christ. The Roman soldiers directly invoked their gods in an oath, which was called the sacramentum, where they swore their allegiance to their specific general and ultimately to the reigning emperor of the Roman Empire. Betrayal of this oath was punished severely. The priestesses of the Roman goddess Vesta, which you see here, would take an oath of chastity for their 30-year term of service. If they were to break their oath, they were punished by being buried alive with a lamp and a little bit of food, since it was unlawful to shed their blood, and their fate was left up to the goddess Vesta. I think we know how that would come out. Oaths have continued to be a part of life unto this day. We don't use them probably as much as the ancients did, but if some of you decide to run for the U.S. Senate and you become a U.S. Senator, you will have to take an oath, where you say, "I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter, so help me God." Very serious oath. If you go to court as a test to give testimony, you have to take an oath. "I swear that the evidence that I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God." We just mentioned Jake and his wedding vows. We each promise to each other at the altar in Protestant tradition, where we say something along the lines that "I take you, this person, X, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until we are parted by death. This is my solemn vow." Oaths. We take them because we strive to have people be loyal to us, and so that we are loyal to others. We promise that we will be on their side, that we will support with our actions, our deeds, and our words. And when people betray these vows to either a person, as in cheating on a spouse, or to an organization or a country, as in the case of Benedict Arnold at the beginning of our history, those people are usually vilified in society. So it is with that in mind that we come to Jesus' portion of the Sermon on the Mount where he talks about oaths. And he says this, again, You have heard that it was said to the people of old, 'You shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord.' But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your yes be yes, and your no, no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one." So Jesus is just retelling the Jews, basically, what they already knew. The school of Shammai already had the following sayings at the time of Jesus. They said this: "The world stands or is sustained fast on three things: justice, on truth, and on peace." So you can see there that it's actually continued in Judaism to this day, that saying, that these three things, justice, truth, and peace, are what all of society is hinged upon. They also said this: 4 persons are shut out from the presence of God: the scoffer, the hypocrite, the liar, and the retailer of slander. They also said this: one who has given his word and who changes it is as bad as an idolater. The school of Shammai was so wedded to truth that they forbade the normal courtesies of society. In fact, they talked about how sinful it was to go to a wedding and tell a bride she looked beautiful when she wasn't. This came from a Jewish understanding of telling the truth, and especially on oaths of taking the name of the Lord your God in vain, from the 3rd commandment. "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain." Usually we refer to this commandment in the context of cursing or swearing and using God's name in our everyday conversation. However, to the Jews, this had more to do with taking an oath and our characters that defined God's name to the nations around them. The Bible had said the following about swearing an oath. It was very serious. Numbers 30, verse 2 says this: "When a man vows a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge, he shall not break his word." That is, if you were to make a promise, you were to keep it. If you were to make a promise to God, Deuteronomy 23 says this: "When you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not be slack to pay it. For the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and it would be sin in you." So the Bible is clear that we should be honest and that we should fulfill our obligations when we promise something. So why is Jesus talking about this? If it was so clear to the Jews and if they understood that they were to be honest, why was he talking about taking oaths or not taking oaths? The first reason was frivolous swearing. People were taking an oath during his day or making a vow where it wasn't necessary. They would say, "By my life," or "by my head," or "by heaven," or "by Jerusalem," or "unless I see the prosperity of Israel, I will not do this," or "I will do this." The rabbis even had a statement at the time of Jesus that sounded very much like Jesus' own statement, where they said the yes of the righteous is yes, and their no is no. There is no need when you tell your wife you're coming to lunch, "By the name of God, my Creator, I will be there at lunch at 12 o'clock. It's absolutely unnecessary. You can just say, "I will be there at 12, and we should believe it. However, there was a second problem that the Jews were dealing with at the time, and the rabbis, and Jesus was weighing in on it, that they had 2 classes of oaths. The first oath was where they would use the name of God. When the name of God, the holy name of Yahweh, was used, this oath was absolutely binding. However, if you did not use the name of God, if if you said your head or Jerusalem or by my life or by the prosperity of Israel, well, I could fulfill the obligation, but it's not as binding as if I had brought God into it. Because when you declare God's name, you're bringing God into your dealings as a partner, therefore you have to fulfill your obligation. You could see how this would create problems. You would have to listen to the oath carefully to see if the name of God was used to figure out if that person was really serious about fulfilling their obligation. So Jesus appears in this part of the Sermon on the Mount to be fighting the compartmentalization of life that the Jews had devised to allow them to get out of fulfilling their obligations at times. And why was he doing this? Well, he says it because God is everywhere. God gives life and breath to each of us. He owns everything. We are just the stewards of his gifts. We can't divide life up and say, well, this is where God is and this is where he's not. He's a partner in this venture, but not in this venture. Once we take the name of Jesus and the name of God as a follower of his, all that we do reflects on him, and he is partnering with us in it. So Jesus basically lays down the principle that for the Christian, oaths are not necessary if we were to live in a perfect world. The only reason we have for oaths is that we live in a sinful world where we need some assurance in binding people who have a tendency to lie, to fudge, to spin things, and to not follow through with what they say. But Jesus here is calling the Christian to live a life that is ethically higher than what people in a sinful world allow themselves to live. He said our yes is to be yes, and our no is a no. Socrates, the great Greek teacher and orator, said a man must lead a life which will gain more confidence in him than ever an oath can do. The Greeks understood it as they looked at life. They said, really, just to take an oath is simple. It's easy to stand up and say, yeah, I'll do this. But when you watch the life of somebody, that's where you really see if you can trust them to fulfill their word. Clement of Alexandria, a couple centuries after Christ, insisted that his Christians in his district must lead such a life that they would never need to be asked to take an oath. So this leads to the question, should a Christian ever take an oath? At the time of Jesus, there were Essenes who thought that they should never take an oath. Josephus, the Jewish historian, wrote, "They are eminent for fidelity and ministers of peace. Whatsoever they say also is firmer than an oath. Swearing," that is not cursing, but swearing on an oath, "is avoided by them, and they esteem it worse than perjury. For they say that he who cannot be believed without swearing is already condemned." So the Essenes took it to a different extreme of where they would never offer an oath. If we look at more modern history, the Quakers also had such a teaching. George Fox, one of their leaders, said this, "I never wronged a man or a woman in all that time," referring to the time that he worked in business. "While I was in that service, I sued in my dealings the word verily." And it was a common saying, if George Fox says verily, there is no altering him. So the Quakers also would never take an oath. So is this the right stance? Should a Christian, if we were one of you young people, if you want to run for Senate someday, should you reject taking an oath if you get to Congress? Or if any of you are called to court? Let's look at some examples from Scripture. Did this mean that, for instance, that the Apostle Paul, who most of the New Testament were his writings, let's look at how he used oaths. 2 Corinthians 1:23. He said, "I call God to witness against me. It was to spare you that I refrained from coming to Corinth." Now, Paul could have just said, "Hey, I decided not to come to Corinth." But what does he do? He invokes the name of God, brings God into the transaction, thereby making it more serious to his listeners and readers so that they would really understand that he was telling the truth. Also in Galatians 1:20, he says this, "Now the things that I write unto you, in what I am writing to you before God, I do not lie." So again, Paul invokes the name of God, not taking his name in vain, but actually bringing God in verbally into his discourse with the believers in Galatia, and says, I'm saying this so seriously that before God, I am not lying to you. There's always been an episode in Jesus' trial that has interested in me. And if you look in Matthew 26, you remember Jesus was being tried, and they were trying to dig up dirt on him. And he was being accused before the high priest, and you remember their stories were contradicting each other. And Jesus, it says in this very verse, in verse 63, that Jesus was silent. He didn't say a thing until the high priest says this, "I adjure you by the living God, I put you on oath by God himself, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." How did Jesus react to that? Jesus broke the silence. Why? Because to the hearers now, God is involved, and it becomes even more serious when there's an oath. And Jesus said to him in verse 64, "It is as you said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Jesus did not remain silent when an oath was invoked. And when God, his Father, was brought into the conversation, he responded. So let's look at the last part of chapter 5, verse 37, because Jesus, it appears maybe he's telling people that not to say it, because he says, if you swear on anything, like an oath, it is from the evil one. So what is he talking about? He said, anything more than this comes from evil or from the evil one. Well, what are the reasons for oath? We've already alluded to this. It is necessary to take an oath from a person because of the potential evil that might arise in that person of where they decide not to do what they're promising. And quite frankly, we have to take an oath on certain occasions. It only means that because we live in an evil world where people lie and have an aversion to telling the whole truth and nothing but the truth, and following through with their promises, that we have to do it at times. But Jesus is saying that although you might have to do it sometimes, we are to be so honest that when people look at us, they should realize they don't need an oath from us. But let's just pan out a little bit and take more of the 30,000-foot elevation approach to this topic. Because I think we can apply this principle more broadly than just oath-taking in case we ever go to court or in case we need to sign documents for business or for school. But Jesus is calling us to be such honest people and people that are self-aware that our word is firm. That is to say, if we say, hey, I'll give you a call sometime, that we will give a call sometime. Or if we say, yeah, I'd love to have you come over to my house sometime, I'll have you over sometime, that we'll actually make an effort to get together sometime. If we tell someone that we will do a certain job by a certain time, that we will do our very best to do it. If we, and I can say this hits close to home, if I tell somebody, oh, you're in my thoughts and prayers, that I actually remember that evening or during the day to pray for them. If we promise our family to spend time with them, even though we have many different obligations at work, that we will actually go through with those promises to spend time with our children and our spouses. That if we promise something to God, that we will actually follow through. You remember the story of Ananias and Sapphira. This was the lesson that the early church learned in a very severe way, that once we promise something to God, as the Old Testament said, we should do it. But Jesus didn't just say, let your yes be yes. He also dealt with the negative side of it. He also said we need to be able to say no. And sometimes this might be even more difficult because we live in a people-pleasing society at times where we might feel pressure to say, no, I can't do that, because other people around us might think, oh man, that's not very good. I just had to tell somebody yesterday, I'm sorry, I have a previous event, I can't come to that funeral. I fought it. I wanted to say, I'll just skip out on this other commitment. But sometimes it takes courage. It takes self-awareness. It takes discipline to be able to tell someone, no, I can't do that. And then follow up on it and actually feel good not doing it. Jesus takes this seriously, because whether we say yes or whether we say no, it matters. Look at this, Matthew 12:36. Jesus said this, and I don't think Jesus said this to scare anybody, but he said, I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. Let's think about this, church. Our words matter. They mean something. And we should be very careful to have some type of filter that before we speak, we actually process enough to understand that other people will come to rely on those words, and they will try to be developing a relationship with us. I found this out the hard way. I became a landlord in my last district. I bought a low-income housing apartment building. I had some characters to deal with from time to time, but there was one who was especially a character. I had found articles about him in the paper where I knew he was a hardened con man. I don't know why I ever let him in the building, but he was the first person that I've ever felt in life that anything he told me, probably the opposite was true. If he said he was in Chicago yesterday, I'd think, I wonder where he really was. I'll pay that tomorrow. Yeah, he probably won't pay that tomorrow. It was impossible to have a relationship with that person. I didn't trust him. I wouldn't trust him with anything personal or anything of value to me. His words ended up meaning nothing to me because he lied. Jesus is saying for Christians, if you want people to count on you, and that's what we're looking at in the Sermon on the Mount, how to be a prosperous person, how to be blessed, how to have happiness. If you want to have good relationships, be a person of your word. Live such a life that when people look at you, they can count on you and know that if you told them no, it actually means no. If you told them yes, you will follow through and you will do it. It seemed like it was an ordinary lunchtime on December 7, 1988. And no one in Spitak, Armenia, a small little town in the north part of Armenia that I went through many times on my drive from Yerevan to Tbilisi, where I was living in the Republic of Georgia. But no one in this little town of Spitak, Armenia knew that they were about to be at the epicenter of the worst earthquake in the history of the Soviet Union. Around noon that day, the ground began to shake violently, and debris of collapsing buildings started to scatter everywhere. Mixed screams of fear and agonizing cries for help pierced the air. The tremor lasted for only a few minutes, but it left a destruction so massive that, as my Armenian friends told me when I was living there, they quit counting the bodies after 25,000. In the midst of this utter devastation and chaos, a certain man named Nicholas left his wife Monica securely at their home and rushed to the school where their son, Armand, was supposed to be. But he got there only to discover that the building had already been reduced to rubble. Nicholas stood there motionless, with tears streaming from his eyes, in shock to see this horrific scene. He remembered his earlier conversation with Armand. No matter what, he'd told him, to reassure his son, I will always be there for you. Nicholas was tempted to give in to feelings of despair and hopelessness at this moment. It appeared there was no way that his boy or any of his classmates could have survived the collapse of their grade school. But instead of going back home, he decided to be true to his word and fulfill his promise to his son. He began to dig feverishly through the rubble, hoping against hope to find Armand, dead or alive. Other parents soon arrived, frantically yelling out the names of their children. In their frenzy, some of them tried to pull Nicholas off from his digging expedition. Dig no more, said one parent. They're all gone. Nicholas persisted and asked and said, aren't you going to help me? He looked to the others, but no one responded. And so he continued digging on his own, stone after stone, all to fulfill the promise to his son. The fire chief eventually came, tried to pull Nicholas away. Fires are breaking out, he told him. Explosions are happening everywhere. You are in danger. Nicholas didn't budge. The fire chief wanted to reassure him. He said, we'll take care of it from here. Please go home now. Instead, Nicholas asked the rescuers, aren't you going to help me now? You're desperate and distraught, the rescuers replied. It's over. You're endangering other people. The fire chief assured Nicholas, go home, we'll take care of it. Nicholas insisted, how could I afford to leave my son when he needs me most right now? If your son was the one under the debris, wouldn't you do the same thing I'm doing? And he continued. Nicholas ended up digging for 36 hours straight, but found only layers and layers of ruined walls. He thought of stopping. He was tempted that he should just accept the fate of his son and come to grips that he would never see his child again. However, after 36 hours, suddenly there was some tinkling sound beneath the debris. Nicholas listened keenly, and as he continued to dig, later found the ceiling of Armand's classroom. Armand, I'm here, he screamed. Nicholas continued digging until he reached a very thin portion of the classroom ceiling. Armand, he screamed once again. A few seconds passed, but no reply, until a scared voice below said, Dad, is that you? I'm here. We're here. Some of us have survived. Nicholas frantically made a hole just big enough for himself to fit into. He forced his upper body into that hole, and in there he saw Armand and the rest of the children tearfully rejoicing. Armand, Dad is here. You're safe now, said Nicholas. Dad, you came. I knew you would come. Come on out, Nicholas instructed. Take my hand. No, Dad, let the other kids come out first. You can get me later. Nicholas, on that day, was able to save 14 children of the 33 pupils in that classroom. As father and son were walking away from the collapsed school building, Armand said to Nicholas, Dad, I want to be like you. I'm going to keep every promise I make. I tell that story because I think that's a lot like us and our Father. Psalm 15:4 said in reference to Jesus, a righteous man keeps an oath even when it hurts. If Jesus kept his oath, and he begged his Father that maybe they could devise another plan than going through with the promise. Lord, if you can, take this cup from me. But there was no other way. And Jesus went to the cross and died and kept his word. And he will keep his word and come back and dig us out of this rubble. Church, will we be like our Father and keep our promises and let our yes be yes and our no be no.